I would have said hello, but I wasn't sure you were there.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want to talk into the void any more than I usually do.
Yeah. So I didn't manage to catch Chris. I think Chris is kind of buried under immediate stuff to do by tomorrow.
Okay, no problem.
But instead I managed to catch Francesca.
Okay, good.
So she's coming. She's probably not going to participate in this paper. The problem is that she's been reading all these 4 papers: modeling, interventions, estimation, and data, and she feels like there is a data section, challenges with data in each of them.
Yeah.
So she's feeling like she would like she could come along with the hope to kind of understand a little bit better what goes in the data section here.
Yeah. Okay.
And to avoid like excessive repetition. That's all.
I think that's what we're worried about, but I think so far the idea has been to try and get it down somewhere, and then if we have to go back afterwards and try and remove some of it, then so be it. But it's better to have it multiple times than not at all. Yeah. But I guess in the data sections, we're just trying to make the references specifically to estimation here, what the challenges are for estimation with data.
Yeah.
What's the challenges for interventions with data.
Hi, Valerie and Dennis. See you again.
Popping up bad pennies.
I know. Yeah. Sorry. This morning, first of all, apologies. This morning, I just wanted to come in and say
it was input that Nigel wanted, so I don't think you should apologise. He kept asking you to talk more, didn't he? So
yeah, and I was like,
fine.
Okay, good. Please, I really didn't want to come in and talk all the time.
I understand that. I think though that he is quite a long way from the coalface, and I think he's very conscious of that. So he really wants input from people who are actually, where the action is. But nevertheless, we've somehow got to step back as well. So it's quite a difficult thing to actually do.
It was good though.
It was good.
I think Lorenzo, to stop you talking requires a full factory reset.
No, and I think on this occasion,
well, mostly welcome.
Be fair, he did keep trying to talk less, and Nigel kept encouraging him to talk more.
No.
I apologize. I really didn't. I want
to apologize.
And I came here as well because I never really quite understand the problem with data and estimation. I never know where to put it, basically. Also, I was trying to get Chris to come, but I haven't managed to kind of catch him. So Francesca's here because she has a similar problem. Not that I don't think she'll participate in the paper, but she was working with Ganna on the data challenges in the interventions paper, and she noticed that there is a data challenge in every paper.
Well, of course.
Okay. So she's kind of monitoring a little bit to understand where to kind of concentrate the efforts among these data challenges. That's all.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I'm Lorenzo assistant in the sense that
yes, we've had
ask for help.
You got your visa in time in the end, did you?
Not yet. I'm still starting the process.
It's a nightmare.
There was something in the budget, wasn't there, which I haven't managed to pin down anywhere, but I'm sure I heard something about how they were going to make it easier for experts to get visas to come into the country. So probably too late for you, though.
There are different types of visa, but there are some tricky. Yeah, some are sponsored, some are not. So some I should pay myself, and it's pretty expensive, and so it's tricky.
The thing I heard was just saying that there was a move to make it easier to employ, scientists and others than it has been lately. But I haven't seen any details, so I'm not sure quite what they were.
And there is, and I believe it's very convenient for who has personal grants, and maybe who has a bit higher position than postdoc. I think there is they have tried.
But the bottom line is, if you want to employ someone from Europe, either don't, or make sure to give them enough time to get the visa, so that you can at least pretend that they are in the UK from the moment that they start working in the UK. Because universities employing people from abroad is much more complicated than I thought, and especially during a pandemic, it seemed perfectly natural that someone doesn't really come to the UK. But apparently that wasn't as obvious as I thought.
Hi, just to say that as usual, I shall have to depart at around 6-ish.
I think we've had apologies from Jasmina and Glenn, so I don't know if we're waiting on anyone else. I guess maybe Paul.
Ian Vernon said he might join us.
Okay, oh great. Yeah, I
Um,
noticed that you'd uploaded his comments to the UQ section, which is great.
I think Luke was planning to join.
Okay, well, we can give it another few minutes then to make a start. Okay, well, maybe we can make a start anyway and see if anyone else joins and if people need to get off. So I know I said last week that I was going to put all together into one single document, but I had another look through and I still think, you know, it's perhaps an advantage just to spend a bit of time working on some of the sections separately first before we try and put it together. I think section 7.3 in particular still has quite a few bullet points that would need some expansion. And I know I spoke to Lorenzo earlier about that, and he's kindly offered to work on that with some of his team. I don't know if you'd had a chance to look at that very briefly, Lorenzo, in the last 20 minutes.
No, I started putting a few bullet points in.
Okay, I hadn't. I don't think my Dropbox is updated.
No, I haven't updated it yet.
Okay, that's great. That's fine. So I think at the moment we've got an introduction, or at least an outline of an introduction, although that perhaps needs a bit of expansion. But that might come later on once we've got all the other sections finalized. Section 7.2, Peter's just uploaded an updated version with Ian's comments out, and here's Ian. I've heard his name mentioned.
Hey everyone.
Hey Ian. We were just speaking your name in vain, so we wondered why Ian.
So it's 7 point. Oh yeah, I see. It's just come into the Dropbox, right?
We were just saying that you'd added some comments to section 7.2, Ian.
Yes, I think so. Peter sent me his initial draft, which is great, and I've just added some thoughts and comments which can be ripped apart or removed or whatever. I just sent that to Peter as of about 12 minutes ago or something.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you want to?
I put it on Dropbox so everyone can see it, and they look fine to me. I haven't read them in detail, but
There's definitely a bit of sort of cleanup that needs to be done or whatever, but I don't know. There's some fun points in there at least.
Do you want to outline what you've added, Ian? Or
Oh,
does it
sure,
make
yes,
more sense for us to?
That's a good idea. We could I don't know. Should I just share screen? Because I've got track changes on, so I can share screen and
Yeah.
show you. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. That would be helpful.
That'd be great. As I say, these are just thoughts that we've sort of discussed in previous meetings I've been in. Please feel free to overrule me, etc., because it's just Peter sent it to me and asked for some
That's great. Yeah, we haven't had much of a UQ chat for a few weeks, so it'd be helpful to find out where we're up to with it.
As I say, I'm sorry, I've been away because well, term time, you know what it's like. It's just been manic.
Yeah, that wasn't a negative respect on your part at all.
No, don't worry. No,
it's
it's
interested to hear what it's up to.
That's right. No, it's fine. Basically, I'm teaching a new course this term, which sadly didn't exist before this. So it's a bad year to pick this one, sadly. Half of it still doesn't exist now, I hasten to add. But anyway, never mind. Right. Let me see. Yes. So this is the stuff Peter sent me. So if I just walk through, if that's okay. Can you guys see that okay, first of all?
Yeah.
Make it full screen or slightly bigger. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you're right. Let's use the is that okay there?
That's great. Yeah.
Fantastic. So again, these points are, some of these are put in a little bit of haste. So smoothing needs to be done, etc., But just so you get a feel for where we're going with this. I guess the basic points of what I'm putting in is including this sort of estimation is done well when you have a good structure within which you are estimating. So that's the sort of the main core. And that links to our UQ idea of, you have your model over here, you have reality over here, and you kind of want to say something about this gap, this jump between them. So this is the thrust of what I'm putting in. Would you like me to just read through it? Would that be best, or just jump to points? What's best here?
I guess sort of highlighting what you picked out as the major challenges would be useful. We can all look at it in detail at home, I guess.
Cool. All these short red bits, you can have a look. They're mainly just emphasizing or bumping things up or whatever. Major challenge, such, rah, 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 rah. So yeah, let's jump to the key bit here. So I've just bumped up some descriptions of emulators and how they're fast and really allow you to do things that you couldn't normally do. Fine. And that's sort of Peter's description of UQ and why it's sort of important. This is the sort of thing which we'll get to in a second. Peter talked about model discrepancy, this structural difference between the model and the real world. And this is our sort of viewpoint, it's a slightly sort of arrogant viewpoint, but we'll just put it down anyway. This inclusion, that's the structural model discrepancy. So you acknowledge the model is here, reality is here. Essentially elevates the analysis from that of just the model to the analysis of the real world itself. And provides a partial defense against the question, why should we use these complex models to make decisions, right? This is our kind of, the thing which is in the media, right? This debate of, why should we believe these complex models, these bloody modelers and all this sort of stuff. Well, this actually gives you your formal defense against this. Anyway, so Peter then talks about history matching, that's all fine. So then we get down to the challenges, which is this section down here. Sort of we kind of discuss the setting of UQ and how useful it is. And then we get into so what are the sort of formal challenges. Now I've added this chunk here, which is about multiple models essentially. So Peter's nice description was the kind of nice vanilla UQ framework, the sort of things we can do, helps you calibrate a lot better, you represent uncertainties better, you do predictions better. Feel free to argue with any of these points, incidentally, I'm just saying them for clarity right now. But the other issue is that once you then acknowledge this idea that the model is not true, then you can incorporate the idea that you have two models that are not true. So you have group A's model and group B's model, and then reality. So what are the challenges? Well, the challenges basically are using our models responsibly, right? And I would phrase that in terms of a challenge of incorporating them in a unified structure where you allow each of the models to not be the same as reality and to be different from each other. And you have a coherent structure which allows you to learn in the most sort of efficient way. So when I think of challenges for like elevating epidemiology to allow you to do, more accurate estimation, more accurate prediction, essentially to incorporate the sort of UQ ideas that we use, this is a big one. So if I just go through this, so this formal separation of model and reality within the UQ framework opens up many further possibilities, including critically the construction of an overarching framework that incorporates multiple epidemiological models in a coherent fashion. That I think is a challenge, because I don't think I've ever seen anyone do that properly. I know there's been lots of ways of combining models using kind of loose statistical ideas, you know, averaging models, weighting them in different ways, weighting them by proximity to data. But those ways implicitly assume a structure which I'm talking about here, and a structure which is usually not motivated because it's not really talked about. People talk about the method of combining, but not the statistical principles which would lead you to justify that method. It's the same as like when you take the mean of a set of data, you say, why is the mean a good thing? Well, it's a good thing if you're trying to estimate an underlying population mean, or it's a good thing if your loss function is of a squared form, but it's a good thing because of deeper reasons that you have to point out. It's not just a good thing on its own merits. And it's the same when people combine multiple models at the moment, at least from what I've seen. I'm sure there's lots of good work out there, some of which I may not be aware of, but so yes.
Is that a specific epidemiological application area problem, or is it just a general UQ challenge?
Well, it's been done well in other areas, or it's been done partially in other areas. So I would say it's very much a pressing problem now for epidemiological, if I was pushed on that. So it's been done in oil for a while. We're doing it now in galaxies, and it's been done in various places. I mean, the multi-level emulation question is now being used quite a bit. So sorry, if I should stop. There's a second point here, which is the idea of fast, medium, and slow models, the multi-level, multi-fidelity question, which is very much linked. So again, this framework, you can talk across as in models on similar levels and how you combine them. And then you can talk down as in you have a fast, simple model, a medium, quite detailed model, and a very slow model, and you can link these up. So again, you need this sort of framework to put them in. So sorry, I should stop and answer your question a bit more clearly. The up and down version has been done in oil for a while. We're doing it in galaxies. The across model has been done in climate quite a bit. In no particular science has it been done like sort of exhaustively and completely, at least that I've seen. But there's been good progress made in certain areas. And the thing with epidemiology, I'd say, is just that we've already been thrown into it, right? I mean, like in this pandemic response, you know, Ronnie Bowman has already been tasked at combining groups in SAGE's predictions into some meaningful metric to give to politicians. So it's not even a question of would we like to do it. It's like we're doing it. And Ronnie herself, who gave a very nice talk at the Newton Institute at the end of last summer, said, you know, if I'd had more time, I would have done much more of a detailed job. I just need more time to get this stuff right. So this is the kind of motivation behind this, in fact, is her statement, in fact.
So Ian, there is some discussion of this in chapter 10.
Oh, right, I'm sure. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sure there's going to be.
That's fine. No, but I think it's good. It's actually good to have it here, but it might be worth referencing through to say there is further discussion in chapter 10, which is the policy discussion.
Absolutely.
Well, it's not just chapter 10. I think we discussed earlier at a previous discussion meeting that this business of multiple models seems to cut across a number of the sections. There's certainly something in 7.5.
Yeah.
Well, Ben and others who have to draw it together, I think we'll have to see what links can be made there. What I'm not very clear about, though, Ian, is just what uncertainty quantification brings to this business of, as you say, constructing an overarching framework that incorporates multiple models. What's special about it?
Well, that's a very good and direct question, and I love it. Well, first of all, how would you construct such a framework? Well, it's been done in UQ, and we have the framework there. Okay, so in terms of the sort of principles for how you construct it, there are sort of
what's the essence of it? For example, is it combining predictions? Is it combining models? What's it trying to do?
So you write down your structure, and you formally have random variables which describe the links between your models or the differences between models and reality. And the key thing is the multivariate nature of those things. So each model will predict multiple outputs of reality, and the key object is what is the structure of that sort of random variable. So let's just talk.
Okay, so just let me sure I understand. You're actually concentrating on the real world things that the models are trying to predict. Presumably, hopefully, they're all trying to predict the same things.
Yes, although they might not even be, which you'd have to incorporate it with a level in your structure. But let's just keep it simple. So you're exactly right. You have 10 things you're trying to predict in the real world. You have 10 model outputs. Now here's the problem. Now people are used to that all the time, right? You make model predictions and you compare them to your real world, and you see if you're close. But normally people will use error structures which are based on a view of observed error, right, of observational error, of the measurement process. And that normally has a totally different multivariate structure. So as in the joint probability distribution you might use, the likelihood you might use, whichever viewpoint of statistics you come from, will be totally different if you view the difference between model and reality as resulting from your measurement process, as opposed to resulting from your incomplete modeling process. Why is that? Because when you measure stuff in reality, well, you get things wrong for various reasons. Quite a lot of the time it's a bit uncorrelated or partially correlated. But when a model is wrong, it tends to be wrong in highly correlated ways. So it's the joint structure of the difference between your 10 real things and your 10 model outputs. It's the correlation between those things, which is different from sort of the normal way people do things. And the key point is in UQ is that we have a series of nice experiments you can do with your model, which helps you estimate and sort of model and construct that joint structure. And that's the subtle bit. That's the bit which takes you beyond the kind of, sure, anyone can write down a network of, of conditionally related quantities. No, it's the sort of techniques to populate that network as well as the existence of the network itself is what I would say.
Okay. So if you can point to some references with more details, I'd be very grateful.
Of course. Yes, we have things on what we call this, like, we break the model discrepancy into two parts, into internal model discrepancy and external. We have a couple of nice papers which kind of show these in basic ways and estimate them. The internal model discrepancy is the stuff that you can get at by further experiments on your model, by maybe changing your model in ways that you haven't normally explored, breaking some boxes apart or having slightly more parameters and doing some basic experiments there. The external stuff is the upfront admission that there is a difference between your model and reality, which you cannot learn from your model alone. You have to just think about reality and put that in. And that's the expert elicitation bit, which comes in. And with suitable.
So I hope there'll be, I'm not sure how, because I don't understand the details, but I hope we can link that up then with the business in the expert elicitation section.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I asked Peter today how long this needs to be, and of course, I'm not sure of the other structures, so you guys need to guide me on this. But very much so. If we can have just a few more sentences of detail here, we can point out how this breaks in half, this structural model discrepancy, and half of it is a nice game that modelers would love because it's just rerunning the model in various controlled ways, like designed experiments across the modeling space in a sense. And the other half is pure expert elicitation again within guided structures that make sense. So we can totally.
So there's a fairly short sentence, section that's been added in 7.5 by Katrina Shea and Will Probert, mentioned in the multiple model things. It's rather superficial actually, but it might be that some making these links, it could be beefed up a bit.
Right, cool. Well, if they just sort of mention it there and we get to say, I mean, we don't want to come across too sort of, it's this way or the highway sort of thing. But if we can just sort of say there are deeper levels in which one can combine multiple models, and there are kind of nicer things one can do, and there's quite a smooth continuum of things one can do. So if we can give the reader that sort of feeling that you can go further and it will get better, this might feel nice. Okay, so is that okay for that bit there? So this paragraph is just multiple models and fast and slow models.
Yeah, so I think the only thing we need to make sure is that we're framing this in terms of challenges rather than just being a description of UQ methods per se. But I think you're definitely doing that here, so that seems fine.
That's a very good point, because I'm sorry, I was writing this today and in a bit of a rush, and I was unsure as to whether to put this paragraph right here, which is a kind of bit of a extension of what Peter wrote, and then we list the challenges, and I refer back to this, or whether this should just go like in the paragraph on challenges. So you're absolutely right. We should kind of make it sort of challenge led. See what you think about this so far. Basically, we've described some of the background, and then we go into the challenges here. So the first one is what Peter said, which again, we need to be very careful how we phrase this, and we need to be political. So the main one is probably the paradigm shift required for the take up of these methods. So we should just acknowledge, of course, that these methods seem weird, and they are weird the first time you hear them. But I'm not sure if that is sort of a challenge. I mean, when I think of a challenge, I think of what's the barrier of UQ that if it went further and we put it in epidemiology, it'd really help people. That's kind of one barrier. That's kind of like a statistics barrier. The second barrier is just what can epidemiologists do better by using these methods? Well, that is more of this. That's a kind of uptake barrier. You know, what methods should they pick and choose from what's out there that would really help epidemiology quickly and fast sort of now? So maybe that then is a challenge, but I welcome opinion on this. We could phrase it in this way: the paradigm shift required for take up of these methods, phrased politely in some way. So so we sort of say that going from the traditional ideas of statistical model fitting to ideas such as including all major sources of uncertainty in and around the models, including structural model discrepancy terms, is new and unsettling for the modeling community. So we need to phrase that in some nice way that everyone's happy with if we want to do this. Anyway, that's the kind of uptake of just using UQ. Again, this is exacerbated by lack of suitable, easy to use software. That's a real challenge. That's a real issue. But other challenges include, so that first bit is essentially, if you use UQ emulation, uncertainty stuff, it'll help. But other challenges include, well, the stuff we just discussed. A, the incorporation of multiple levels of fidelity of model. That's the fast, medium, and slow stuff. Because sometimes people will say to me, look, my model's really quite big. It's really quite expensive to run. And I've got quite a lot of parameters now. So I don't even think your emulation techniques will work. You know, if you have a model which takes a day to run and you've got 20 parameters, for example, then it's getting, you know, if you've got a big computer, you're okay. But if you've got 50 parameters and it takes a week to run, then it's starting to get a problem, right? Even to emulate. But this is the solution to that, the fast, medium, slow thing. Because surely before you built that big, expensive model, you probably built slightly smaller, faster versions. And in which case we can incorporate those. And that's really powerful. Again, that's used in oil and it's used very successfully. I'm sorry to bring up oil because I hate it, but it's used there and it's really successful and it really helps. So that's, as I say, is really the most efficient way to emulate very expensive detailed models. Okay, and then a B is the point we've just talked about, the combination of multiple models from multiple groups into a coherent structure to give more powerful but more realistic, in terms of uncertainty statements, predictions, and so subsequent decision support. We can link to all our other parts of this document which talk about this. So again, the first part is paradigm shift to use UQ methods and these slightly more sophisticated views on uncertainty in the real world. And then it says specifically fast, slow models, specifically then multiple models. So UQ, fast, slow, then multiple. Those would be sort of some major challenges I would see. And then Peter says also then about the stochastic nature of such models. So the kind of the fact that UQ techniques, they were designed a lot on deterministic models. When you get to stochastic models, there's an extra layer of complexity. Although, as I remark on the side, you can see my comments here, is that actually stochastic models take us closer back to standard statistics that we're a bit more familiar with. So actually stochastic models are nothing to be scared of in a sense. It's more like, it's actually like a very well-controlled statistical study where there really is like an underlying distribution which doesn't change over time, and there aren't really outliers, and it's all very nicely controlled situations. So it's quite nice. But the adaptation to the stochastic framework is, of course, a major one now. Now those are just my thoughts, kind of, you know, off the top of my head. So please feel free to disagree, overrule.
TJ, I think you had a comment. Do you want to?
No, well, just when Ian was talking about what, so I think just within the remit of the kind of challenges kind of idea. I mean, I you know, obviously I buy into, you know, model discrepancy and things like that being important, but in essence, if we can't calibrate models, we have nothing to put model discrepancy on. So, you know, to me, I still think the major kind of challenge for getting epidemiologists to buy into this is really, it's still, I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I just feel it's more of a calibration issue. Like, I think people are struggling to calibrate their models, and the model discrepancy stuff is almost extra on top of that, because if you can't calibrate your model fast enough, you've got no predictions, and so everything has to be done in real time. So I just kind of feel like the calibration, the estimation part is the really kind of challenging part. I think if you can provide methods that help epidemiologists to do that, then you can start thinking about the model discrepancy kind of ideas. I think I'm not sure whether the model discrepancy is a key challenge, or whether it's something that is we would like to change the kind of the field to think about those issues more. But is that the same as being a challenge, right? In terms of
Yes.
Peter, if you predict with models that have a lot of discrepancy, you're doing a false prediction. You're either overfitting, which is bad, or you're predicting with a bias, which is also bad.
No, I buy that, Peter, but the problem is if you can't produce a prediction because you can't calibrate your model, you've got nothing to, like the whole, the real key problem is getting a prediction in the first place.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think the way I view these challenges are, these are things that we should be ready to do for the next pandemic. We're not going to get it working now because everyone's working so hard. There's no criticism here that people haven't taken these ideas up, because everyone's working so hard they don't have time to do it. But before the next pandemic, we should have done all this stuff and be ready to go. And we should be ready to go with this full panoply of discrepancy, knowing where we are, how models interact with one another, rather than starting last March with everyone just getting a phone call saying, can you model this horrendous pandemic that's just turned up?
Yeah. I buy into that as well. The other point I would make, though, is again, with the model discrepancy stuff, one of the things that we have been talking about in this meeting beforehand is again, ideas of how you might incorporate model discrepancy into estimation algorithms that already exist. So for example, lots of people are doing things like particle MCMC or data augmented MCMC and those sorts of things. And so, there's a general question about how one might put model discrepancy into those, is it the sort of thing that can be easily integrated into your favorite MCMC algorithm, or does it require that you...
Very much so. If I could just come back to your first point, DJ, because you raise a very good point here. We've got to get the emphasis of this right and the importance of this right. This whole paragraph here talks about the benefit of emulation and calibration for computer models, right? Now whether this needs to be rephrased and bumped up more as a challenge, and sort of put in that sort of context, like, a major challenge is the efficient, immediate calibration of any epidemiological model you need to use. That could be bumped up as a challenge, and we could suggest that emulation style techniques and UQ style techniques are good for that. So I totally agree with you. That's kind of like the sort of primary goal. However, remember, the inclusion of model discrepancy makes calibration easier, right? It doesn't hamper you, actually. If you try to calibrate with zero model discrepancy, then you have a very small target and it's very hard to hit. Putting in model discrepancy actually makes the task easier, because you're actually doing the realistic calibration job by saying my model won't fit more than 5%. So I really shouldn't be worried about discrepancies less than that, or sharp peaks in likelihoods that are telling me that I'm between 3% and 1%. This doesn't matter, okay? So model discrepancy actually makes calibration easier, is a key point. But you're absolutely right. Our emphasis shouldn't be on model discrepancy, model discrepancy, model discrepancy. However, if we're writing a section on estimation, it presupposes, is your overarching statistical model accurate? Is your overarching statistical model reasonable? Otherwise, your estimation has to be flawed. So that's the motivation for it, I suppose.
Can I make two sort of quick comments on that? So that's really nice, Ian. And I think one of the major challenges, right, is getting people to buy in to the fact that putting more error into your models is a good thing. So when we did our ABC stuff way back in the day, we got statistical reviewers coming back and saying, well, your variance is twice as big as it is under the MCMC. So therefore your approximation is rubbish. So why would you use it? Right. And so, and actually trying to get across the idea that it's okay to have some additional error is kind of anathema to kind of most statistical approaches, which are always about trying to reduce the uncertainty. So I think maybe one of the major challenges is communication of that really important point, that actually it's okay to have a bit, and in fact, good to have additional error, because you are being more robust. So actually selling that is an important point. And then just the other comment was coming back to Valerie in the chat, has suggested about the sections needing reordering. I wondered, so in the estimation part, we've written quite a lot about the challenges of calibration with stochastic models and missing data and things like that. And I just wonder whether maybe that moving that section before this might work really well, because then you're bringing in the emulation stuff, like, because we talk about speed and we talk about real-time challenges and things, and then that really fits with all the emulation stuff that you guys are talking about here.
That is a good point. We should make this section say, like, UQ has this philosophical framework, but it's also just a series of good tools, and emulation can just be plugged into many different calibration approaches. So maybe we should make this sort of a bit more generic and helpful, and just say that, you know, emulation speeds up whatever it is you're doing, and hence that would then link to the other sections you're talking about. That might be a bit.
So TJ, are you suggesting putting the UQ section further down, sort of after the more traditional estimation?
Well, possibly. I wasn't really thinking that. I was just thinking that we had an introductory section which basically spells out the kind of challenges with calibration and epidemiology. So it kind of is just it. So we did talk in an earlier meeting about whether we would move that to the introduction, but then we decided it probably wasn't worthwhile. But I wonder whether, like, even if it was just a case of moving a couple of paragraphs up, it might just it might just sort of give a nice introduction into all this stuff you're talking about here, particularly with regards to doing emulation and model discrepancy and all of those sorts of things. Because all it basically does is just talks about the fact that, you know, a lot of epidemic models are, so if it, you know, if you're doing stochastic models in large populations with a lot of missing data, then you need a complex estimation algorithm or a simulation algorithm to do that. And that's slow. And so therefore you want to do it in real time. And so therefore that's difficult. I just wondered whether that, not necessarily moving the whole estimation section above, but maybe just that bit of the introduction and moving that up. I don't know whether that would help or not, but it just it felt to me like that was a nice precursor to all of this stuff that you're talking about, because it spells out the general problems. Whereas then what the section on UQ is really saying, well, this is how we deal with these problems. And
section 7.4 is quite long at the moment, and some of it is quite technical and descriptive rather than necessarily being challenge orientated. So I think that's a good point, TJ, that we could perhaps move the first couple of paragraphs into the main introduction to estimation and why we do it. And then that could follow, as you say, quite nicely into UQ.
I mean, it might already be covered in the introduction, in which case.
So in which case
you could just delete those things from 7.4 and be done with it.
Yeah, I can certainly work on that this week, but it's good that we've got hopefully agreement across the board. Valerie, was that kind of what you were thinking, or were you thinking more along the lines of
reacting to TJ's point and thinking, you know, that in some way he was saying that the issues of calibration come first, and somehow so maybe we needed to address some of those a bit earlier up. But it was, I mean, you guys are the experts, and doing what you suggest sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Ian. That's really helpful. I noticed, Daniel, you had a comment as well in the chat. Do you want to?
Shall I stop sharing now? Are we okay?
Yes, if you don't mind, that's great. And then we can have a more general discussion.
I have also a question for TJ. He was saying about this, if you have larger intervals, but then you could show that you could be more robust. Then I'm thinking maybe it's because you mean if you are accurate enough in right on the true measurement, and then even if you have a larger interval, is that what you mean? Or maybe I was kind of confused.
I think what I meant is so it was essentially what Peter and Ian were talking about there. So when you make a prediction from a model, the prediction is conditional on that model being the correct model, right? And we know that the model is wrong. So the argument with something like model discrepancy is I mean, the thing we've spoken about at previous meetings. So David Spiegelhalter gave a talk, well, has given various talks, but he shows, for example, a plot of predictions from lots of different models that are going into SPI-M. And those predictions differ from each other, but more importantly, they differ from each other sometimes where the intervals from those predictions don't overlap with each other either. And that is because every model is wrong in a slightly different way, but every model is slightly overconfident about it because you're not accounting for the fact that your model is wrong, right? So you know, if I think the idea, what I was sort of suggesting there was if you have the sort of model discrepancy idea, you have a little bit more uncertainty. If it's done in a reasonable and well-constructed way, it just means that it's a little bit more robust in the sense that the real trajectory is more likely to be in there, right? And I suppose that's an obvious thing to say, right? Because of course, if you just make your intervals huge, then the trajectory will definitely be in there. But I think the idea is you do it in a slightly structured way. So you just want to avoid overfitting and you want to avoid being overconfident. But what's interesting about that for me is that that's very much against the ethos of many of the traditional statistical approaches, which are all about, you know, statistical power and improving power and reducing uncertainty and all of these sorts of things. And actually, there's an argument to be made here that it might actually be beneficial to have a bit more uncertainty, particularly if you're trying to make decisions under uncertainty. But this is entirely not my field of expertise. So Ian and Peter are, you know.
And given that you don't know what's the right model, right? Then yeah, that's the point.
Yeah, it's just to try and not be overconfident about the model, I think. So I guess another way that you can think about it is if you have like the multiple model comparison thing, I kind of feel that that's also a sort of, I know it's not what Peter and Ian feel is model discrepancy, but it feels like that to me. If you have multiple models and you're averaging them together in some sense to make predictions, that's probably safer than just making all predictions from one model. And those average predictions will be wider because they account for some variability between the models.
That framework there, you say, TJ, could be the right thing to do, but it comes attached with the following, that structure I keep banging on about ad nauseum, is that your statement there is each model has a wide model discrepancy and the model discrepancies for each model are entirely independent. And then that gives you the statement, you should then average the models together and you'll get a prediction which is now more accurate than any individual model, in the same way that you average any other sort of group of things in statistics. But it comes with that statement that all their model discrepancies are independent. And actually, clusters of models tend to be not like that. You have a few groups who've made the same physical assumption. I wouldn't want to say error, I just mean the physical assumption of how they model something. So they're all similar. So their model discrepancy is going to be quite highly correlated because they've kind of kicked everything this way. And some other groups are a little bit different, and maybe they've made a real error and they're just different and wildly wrong. So getting that structure right then starts to give you a much more nuanced prediction, which will take account of the fact that three of the groups are almost the same. And this other group is very different, but probably wrong. Then you start combining things in a nuanced way. So everything you say there is absolutely true, but it comes with a very specific model discrepancy assessment, which most people probably wouldn't feel that comfortable with when they examine it in detail.
There's another thing about averaging models, because you could get a big cluster of models here, but the reality is somewhere down here. So you average your models, you've taken out some of the discrepancy, which is the within model discrepancy, but the sort of between model discrepancy, but there's a discrepancy to reality, which you've not got hold of. Now the data will drag you across. And in epidemic, it's easier than climate, where this has been, we don't have any data in climate. Climate prediction, you know, what the climate is in 2050, we don't know. But here we have got data, so we can drag them over, but we have to be careful that we do drag them over to the right place. Just the discrepancy saying the mean of this model cluster is reality is likely not to be true, because all the models can be wrong in the same way. And structurally, that's what you expect, because they all have the same science, which is why I always like one model to be way out from all the others, because that tells you that there is something going on that you're not quite sure about.
But I think this is where it's really, you know, having something which is quite accessible to epidemiologists that discuss these things would be super useful, because again, I mean, you know, when we talk about reality, what we're doing is typically we're calibrating to data, and if our models produce something which looks like the data, then we think that that's not too far away from reality, and that's probably fair enough. If your models are miles away from the data, then it's just clearly a bad model and you wouldn't use it. So I think that there are some subtleties in terms of what you're talking about here, in terms of the link between like, because we don't know reality, because if we did, we wouldn't need the model. So it's a case, those sorts of that communication and those kind of ideas and things. I think if we can make that a bit more accessible to
and I think epidemiology is easier than climate for that reason, because you have a lot of data, you keep recalibrating to the data, you keep pushing the models back to where they need to be. But that's a bit like weather forecasting, where if you let the weather forecast model go with no data, with no assimilation, it drifts off to somewhere miles away from where the real climate is. So you do have this thing of continually putting data in, but that's, in a sense, that's compensating for the model error all the time.
Yeah, and it doesn't help you with medium to long term. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, and I was just going to say, if we could move on to section 7.5 before Philip has to leave.
I will have to go before too long. So if I could just take you through 7.5, let me
that would be great.
share my screen if I can. Let's see, how do we do that? See if this works. Can you see this?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Lorenzo has his hand up.
Do you want to ask now, Lorenzo?
No. If you need to go, no. Let's no. It's fine.
So I had noticed, but I thought we just
no, that's fine. It made a lot of sense for you to kind of talk to.
So just to point out the construction of this document. So initially, Luc Kofeng and I cobbled together something. And since the last discussion meeting, well, since 2 weeks ago, in fact, this was circulated to the people who spoke at the little half-day workshop we had last June, and some others who were interested. I got quite a lot of feedback. So in fact, this document has been mangled by trying to incorporate the various comments that were made. It's grown reasonably long, but I think it's fairly relevant as it stands, but comments will be obviously welcomed on that. One, just to raise this point on multiple models, that comes a bit towards the end. Let me just find the right bit. Let's go straight now. Okay, so you see that section. So this was the only business on multiple models. It's been contributed, as I said earlier, by Kat Shea and Will Probert. It's pretty superficial, and I wouldn't like to try to unpack it personally and exactly what they meant by a lot of the things they said. But it probably does need to be unpacked a bit. But more importantly, it needs to be somehow aligned with other mentions of multiple models elsewhere in the whole document. The difference here, of course, is this is largely thinking about models in the absence of much data. And I'm not really on top of what Shea and Probert and others have really done here. And it may be that it will be necessary to go back to them for some filling out, but there are definitely links which I feel need to be made there.
Mm-hmm.
I also confess that I've naturally got a strong interest in expert judgment, but I personally do not pretend to be an expert in it. And most of the people who I do consider to be experts did not take part in our discussion meetings. So it's really only in this last couple of weeks when I've gone back to them with a document and asking for their comments that really I've got what we might call some expert judgment on expert judgment. And I hope I haven't missed that. What I plan to do is when we have a final collated document to send that back to them for their objections. Talking of objections, there was one rather strong objection, which I think essentially can be summarized as saying that this doesn't really take enough account of model discrepancy. I didn't say it in so many words, but it said, you know, we're saying we're starting with models and we believe our models, and all we have to do is use expert judgment to elicit distributions for parameters or quantities or whatever in those models. And we've got to get beyond that. It's perfectly true, either with model uncertainty or with discrepancy, or But on the other hand, if you don't have a lot of data, and that's where you really want to use the expert elicitation, then it's not all that clear how you would proceed along those lines.
I think with discussions we've had in section 2 as well, as you say, if you send them the full document once it's ready, then hopefully they'll see that we do discuss model discrepancy quite a bit in 7.3 and 7.4, 7.2 and 7.4. So.
But I think the important thing is that the different subsections don't stand in contradiction to each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's goal number 1, isn't it? Not to be contradicting. They may not fully be integrated, but not contradicting is a good plan. Perhaps just here, we just mentioned that the additional model discrepancy thing and refer to the section we just discussed. Because obviously you're absolutely right. Like early pandemic, you know, parameter estimation via expert elicitation is paramount. So it's right this section would focus more on those sorts of issues. But if we just mention it here and say these can also be used, then in section 7.2 we can refer back to this and say, you know, we'd use these techniques for our model discrepancy as well. Everyone's a winner.
Yeah. Well, when I think when we get the full document and we get feedback from the people who understand these things better than I do, maybe they can help with that.
Yeah.
Other points, there's quite a lot of introductory stuff before we get to the challenges. I've just emboldened the challenges.
Yeah.
So there's one. Find good ways to infer back parameters of the model on the basis of assessing observable quantities, like or not. There's a whole list of challenges down here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Formulating useful and relevant questions. This is a bit apple pie in the sky stuff. It's the actual expert elicitation stuff has perhaps been pushed down a bit. There's some more general business of using experts to help you formulate models and identify parameters. But then we do talk about the importance of expressing uncertainty by means of probability, and then use structured expert judgment. And there's quite a lot above about structured expert judgment and the different systems that are available, something about its successes. I guess just as Ian was saying, one of the main challenges is to get people to care about uncertainty quantification. The main challenge here is to get people to care about structured expert judgment. But beyond that, there are these things. I probably don't have time to go through them in detail, and they're best read at your leisure. But there's a set of bullet points which we can perhaps go through. And the question of whether they need expanding and whether they can just stand as bullet points, I think they're almost self-explanatory on the whole. So the first one is a bit like making people care, but it goes beyond that, building the expertise, which is important. Making the participation of experts engaging. We've got to get them to do the job, and we've got to find ways of identifying and training them and being ready to go. It's quite important to be, if we're thinking about doing something for next pandemic, expert elicitation will be needed in the very early stages. And that means you've got to be ready to go in the early stages, which seems to mean that you have to have some sort of standing panel, which you can put in mothballs, but it should be ready to get out of mothballs quickly. I think that's important. More technically, there are different procedures around which have to be compared for different purposes. The next one is again to do with readiness, having the tools ready to go for the job. One thing I think hasn't been considered much, except in a purely and trivially Bayesian fashion, which is not quite broad enough, is integration of expert opinion with data as they come in, so in the early stages of the pandemic, and importantly, communication. So that's a sort of summary of what we've done there. It's probably a bit long, there were a lot of comments included, and I wanted to give people the chance to have their say.
Thanks, Philip. I guess with the introductory section, if there's a lot of stuff which isn't related to challenges, then maybe some of that could be incorporated into the main introduction.
Good
if it's
point.
not already done so.
Yeah, very good point.
It's
But
sorry, I had a quick question in terms of Phil's point about needing some sort of standing panel almost, is to what extent that panel needs to be particularly expert in EPI applications.
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry?
Very much so.
So, because I mean, you could argue that there's a need for this in all sorts of fields. I mean, you know, and a lot of emergency fields too. So perhaps it's wider than just having a panel that's particularly appropriate for EPI applications, but having something, you know, and then perhaps it's easy. I guess what I'm saying is if it were not quite so focused, it might be easier to make the case for it.
I thought we were talking about challenges specifically in the pandemic context. So
No.
that's why it is focused.
No, it is. I was just mulling whether if there was a standing panel for SAGE, then it you know, it could cover other areas as well as epidemic.
I don't think so, Valerie. I think the importance is to have this is a panel of experts. And expert means specifically highly knowledgeable understanding in the very specific area that you're talking about.
Yes, sorry, I think I was thinking more about the facilitators.
Oh, yes. Sorry, yeah. In terms of administrative support and facilitation, you're absolutely right. That is completely broad.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking at cross purposes. It was that side of things.
There is a point. That is a good point.
Does anyone have any comments on the bullet points at the end, either pro or against?
Can I just ask a couple of questions? Maybe not directly on the bullet points, but I've never really thought as carefully as you have, Philip, on expert elicitation. But it strikes to me that there are different levels of well, the experts can come in at different levels. So, for example, as you mentioned, especially at the beginning, the data is really, really scarce. So you need expert's opinion. The truth is that the expert opinion at the beginning of something that is unknown is partially informed by the expertise in the field. So if they are epidemic modelers, that's obviously helpful, but it's partly affected by the data they have or they have access to. And once you have one data set and you perform your estimation and you come up with a number, then that as an expert is your opinion. And what happened at the beginning of this pandemic is that numbers were number estimated from China, for example, were quite wrong in terms of what R0 is, what the doubling time is. And not everybody had access to the same data. And at that point, in the scarcity of data and scarcity of time, the expert elicitation is that you might even have many people that shout different answers, but is either the one that shouted louder or the ones that have a track record of being the expert.
No, well, I think the structured expert judgment protocols do, as far as I understand it, guard against these kinds of things as best they can. And also, can I point you to this section I've just highlighted on the screen, which does make this point. It's another challenge, really, to get practitioners and modelers to give and to stop giving point estimates and to be open about their uncertainty, and particularly projections from past or parallel experience must take into account both likely similarities and likely differences, and hedged about with appropriate, typically high uncertainty.
So the challenge, that's great, you're right. The challenge I can see here is that when you communicate this to policy members, they want a number rather than an interval. And so that's a communication challenge if you want.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, there is a communication challenge, which we've mentioned at the end. I mean, presumably, I hope that SAGE itself is happy with expressions of uncertainty, and it's their job to phrase those in a way which policymakers will best understand.
Yes, 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 I completely agree. It's still a bit challenging because you come up with multiple voices, especially in a situation like COVID, where the problem is intrinsically extremely noisy and difficult. Like understanding COVID is really kind of the worst disease ever at understanding what's going on, I think, in many respects. And especially early on, in the end, policymakers just hear different voices, even from SAGE, or they hear a lot of uncertainty from SAGE, and then they are like, so what should we do? And they maybe look at the same one or two people that have helped in the previous pandemic. That's my feel. And in particular, I was just trying to understand what's the concept of expert here, because I remember, especially at the beginning in SAGE, we were all working with what were considered the SAGE estimate consensus estimates that were obtained from previous studies done in China, especially in January and so on, where the data was extremely scarce, the testing was rubbish, there was a lot of movement and so on. And so, to be frank, when Francesca, that is now on the call, she was extremely helpful when we had a couple of chats. She was not involved at all in this process, but we had a couple of chats, and she was just tracking the numbers of hospitalizations in Italy. And just because she was following it, rather than sitting on an expert opinion on what the doubling time should be, that really kind of made me think that I should probably listen to her at that point. And she was estimating a much faster doubling time than what was the SAGE consensus. And it's only because an apparent non-expert who was just looking at the data a bit better than or more recent data than an expert that has relied on previous estimates from data that was available early on, extremely kind of limited and biased.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important, and there are problems of bias, but really, I think as long as appropriate uncertainty is represented in the beginning, and people don't pretend to be surer than they are, and there's a challenge there to get them to do that, then you should be able to move fairly quickly towards messages which you see in new data. And that's one of the challenges I've now highlighted here. Timely, efficient, appropriate integration of expert opinion and accruing empirical data. It is absolutely vital.
I completely agree with you. That the challenge there I can see is in publications. Someone who's just get the first number out, gets lots of citations, is shaping everything in the policy later on, and it's not at all sexy to kind of publish a minor improvement on something that has gone out in Science, because you clearly don't get a paper on Science because of that. And therefore, this idea about updating your estimates is extremely important, and I completely agree with you that it should be done. But from a scientific point of view, it might be valuable, but even that is not probably credited as much. Certainly in an emergency is credited even less.
I mean, you're absolutely right that, I mean, getting these things to work properly, getting motivated, generally experts who understand uncertainty and can do their job and who don't necessarily feel they have to shout louder than everybody else. All these things are tremendous challenges. There's no doubt about it. I think the same is true, not just in expert elicitation, but in everything that happens in trying to make sense of this pandemic. Can I just say, if there are any quick further points, I'll take them now, and then I have to leave.
I was just going to say, Philip, if you wouldn't mind uploading that document to the Dropbox, because the one at the moment's got all the track changes in, which is quite difficult.
No, sorry, excuse me. Let me just explain what you do. You use track.
Oh, okay, I assume that was
the same document. You just turn off. You just go to no markup.
Okay, thank you.
It is the same document, except I just highlighted a couple of things.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm using the online browser version, which.
Oh, it doesn't. Yeah, the track changes is wonderful. You can put them in or take them out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so anything else, or can I leave?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for it. That's great. And
okay.
I guess if we have any comments reading through it in detail this week, we can get in touch. But otherwise,
okay.
You need to unshare.
I got to share. I don't know what's happening now. Yes, I've lost the business where I can unshare.
Yeah, so I think you pointed it
Max,
Oh, here we
yeah.
are. Here we are. Yes.
you made it quite well as a
Oh, here we are. Stop shares. There it is.
yeah. I think basically my question was who is an expert. That's the key point.
Yeah,
Probably.
that is very much a key point, and there's no simple answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks
See
for that.
you.
See you
I
next
won't
week.
be, I probably won't be a next time. So in a couple.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.
And also, like one question is, an expert could be an expert that knows about some parameters, but could also be an expert that decides how you should structure your model. And those are slightly different things. It's, for example, if I know that there are many different models in the group, I might just say, okay, in my model, I only do this bit here because other people are not covering this. So my choice is to kind of decide what to put in the model and what not to put in the model in terms of structure, which is a different, I think, sort of, it's still an opinion, an expert opinion on what you think it's important, what's not, but it's not this. It's a slightly different level than a parameter uncertainty.
Mhm.
And so it's just, yeah, I don't know who is an expert really.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, all your questions are very interesting, and they're just highlighting that this is a complicated process, and that there's sort of multifaceted process, and some parts of it you can imagine would be really quite tough. However, there are a lot of parts which can be done relatively, simply, and would at least get us to a better place than we are now. So you're absolutely right. You're thinking ahead to all the complexities, and there are many, and we need to crack some of them. But there's some simple stuff we can do, which would be, low-hanging fruit, to use that annoying phrase, which would get us a bit further. But the other thing is that sadly, it's almost sort of unavoidable. I mean, in a sense, this is already being done. It's just without any thought or without much thought. Because when people take parameter values, like when you said early in the pandemic, people just take a fixed value from China, someone's published it, I'll just use it in my next 10 works or whatever. Well, that is expert elicitation, just in a sort of very simple way. So it's already being done. It's not that we're sort of suggesting we want to do something new. It's more like we need to improve the thing which is being forced upon us. So in which case, then we want to open this box and do it. But yeah, I have much to say about each of your questions, but I'll just say one more thing, which is about when you said transferring this to policymakers, the communication issue. I don't know how much in this paper we talk about that sort of end of things, but of course that is a huge challenge there in terms of the meaningful conveyance of uncertain predictions and perhaps, again, sort of differing expert opinions. Like with combining lots of models, combining lots of experts, one can do it in different ways. And there's ways which make me nervous, such as I go into a room and I talk to 5 experts about a science that I don't know anything about because I'm a Bayesian statistician, and I average their expertise into a point which none of them really agree with, but it's in some sense in the middle in some metric. Now that makes me nervous because I'm putting myself almost above them to say, you guys are all a bit wrong, and I'm going to average your results. So that's kind of crazy. But the other alternative is that I explore the full space of decisions which these 5 experts represent. So I parameterize it somehow, and I deliver to government saying there is divided opinion, and I want to deliver to you a tool which will explore this entire decision set, which could be anywhere in between these 5, not just the 5 locations, but some smooth space in between. That would be the full extreme in the other direction, which is to say any of them could be right. In fact, really, you could go out a little bit wider if they're disagreeing so much. You could have asked more experts. But really, what you want to do is to do something in between those 2 approaches. You don't want to have the person who's coalescing these sorts of views to be in some sense superior. That's wrong. But on the other hand, you don't just want to stand back and say, well, any of them could be right. I don't know. You want to pitch it in the middle. And there are processes to try and get that in the middle. Delivering that to government in a way that they can actually use, well, that's hard, but not impossible, right?
Yeah, and I'm one of the Chris and I are submitting our estimates of R and the medium-term projections to SPI-M, and Ronnie is combining them. So I don't really know all the details about Ronnie's approach because it was impenetrable to me. But yeah, you named her before because it's an attempt. It's a kind of a hands-on, pragmatic way of doing it now, and you're suggesting a slightly more principled approach behind it, which I completely understand.
That's it.
And it's very, very much needed.
I'd always be very clear that Ronnie is doing a very good job in a very high pressure situation. And that it's more just from her own talk where she said, if I'd had a year before this, you know, then things would be different.
Yeah, we're all in that situation. Like they ask about
That's why we
estimation from households, and it's just loads of kind of really technical maths, and you have 1 week to do it. That kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's why I was trying to bring Chris in the part about the data challenges, because we are just taking care of one of the models that is trying to kind of do medium-term projections, and so I wanted to ask whether the discussion that was before about the risk of like the problem about calibrating your model, that's particularly difficult in epidemiology compared to other sciences, because the data is much more indirect. It's only informing what you're interested in modeling as a process, only in a very indirect way, and all the data streams you have are biased in different ways. And if you try to fit the same coherent model to multiple data streams, you suddenly notice that the data streams are in disagreement with each other, which highlights bits of your model that are missing, these are the challenges that we face every single week with Chris. And I'm wondering whether this kind of UQ ideal, beautiful description that you just made is particularly difficult in epidemiology, because more than in other sciences, the data you have is much less directly informing the part of the process you try to get.
Oh, I love it though. No, I mean, so I spent all this talking about model discrepancy, which is how the model is wrong. But now you're talking about a very important situation, which again, I've seen in COVID, for example, as you say, the data has, unreported systematics through no fault of anyone. Everyone's trying their best, but the data is off. And as you say, you try and, look at the early pandemic hospitalization admissions and deaths and stuff, and you see these things are not quite aligned, and there's issues there. And I think we tracked down various lags early on at the first peak in hospital admissions, really digging down into the NHS data sets, and showed that there were 10-day, 5-day, 2-week lags in that first ramp, which would screw up anyone's model if they tried to match first peak, because of exactly what you're talking about there. Yeah, no, this is really interesting. This is what one needs is sophisticated observational error structures, essentially correlated error structures, which acknowledge the fact that what you're seeing as your data is not quite the same as reality. In our standard framework, we have an object which is reality, and then we have a random variable which is the observational error that distorts that, and then that gives you the data that you see. And that structure, just that simple relationship, can be very rich, because you could say I have correlated systematics of which I know about some of them. I suspect reporting lags in hospitals, for example, and I suspect others, like cases being tested early on. We'd only tested certain people who walked into hospitals and not everyone else. And there's other ones I just don't know about that I think they'll be there. Anyone tells me they trust the data more than 5% for COVID, I think they're crazy, right? I mean, there's underlying stuff going on there. So, but you can just build this up. You can just layer upon layer upon layer. Say there are systematics I'm aware of, like with structure. I don't know what they are, but I know they're correlated. So a reporting issue would be correlated. Perhaps you have weekend effects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can build all this in, and again, we spend a lot of time doing this. I mean, we've done this in various scientists. I don't just want to say we kind of, we have this structure, we know what you should do. And in some of these Galaxy works we did, I mean, I did an analysis where we broke down all these uncertainties, and I think we had 8 separate sources of uncertainty, each of which had correlated structure due to scientific reasons that we identified and we wrote down, and we put the structure in and we estimated using separate experiments. So we've built up these pieces, and then suddenly we have an uncertainty structure where now to calibrate the model is quite straightforward, because you've got all the uncertainties which you think are actually there. And then to fit the model, well, now you find you're fitting the model within, in that case, it was like within sort of 7% of the data, because once we put all the uncertainties in there, that was the target. To do more than that would be overfitting. Suddenly the calibration process becomes a little easier. Not necessarily, because you might have forgotten something, right? I mean, you can always not know about something. But what it then does is it alerts you that you've put in 7 of the systematics that you think there may be an 8th one, because you're still not fitting the damn data. But it's a really interesting game, and not easy, but there are statistical frameworks to do it.
Yeah. I mean, we are at a much simpler level, but we are facing these challenges all the time. And Chris, for example, might comment a lot about how hospital data, and the hospital data is just coming, they just, you never know what they record, right? You receive the data, but you have no idea really who has recorded that data. So we're trying, and so yeah, Chris has estimated a couple of things. Just
I mean, it's one of the things. It comes down to it's sort of data transparency, and it's this sort of disconnect, I guess, between all the modelers and the people doing the data collection and the reporting. So you know that we'll get given a data set, and it says this is how many people were in hospital with COVID on this day, and we're like, okay, that's great. That's exactly what we want. And I mean, you don't know what issues there are underpinning that. We can assume there'll be some missingness, but I mean, one of the major examples is we were modeling it for months, kind of taking it as being the ground truth. Then I got seconded to the Manchester Foundation Trust Hospital. I started there and then found out that they'd been double submitting all of their COVID patients by accident for the last 4 months. And then ended up, so basically there was 1,500 patients in the hospital system that just didn't exist. And those data sets are never retroactively corrected because they're daily submissions. And so then you've got to try and build, once you know about that, you can account for it in your model. You can be like, oh, well, I understand why my model's now misperforming in this phase because there's people who don't exist. But at the time, Lorenzo and I spent ages trying to work out why these curves just weren't at all consistent with each other.
Daniel, do you want to say, do you want to discuss about anything from 7.3 at all?
I'm sorry. No, I don't have much to say actually. So I think what we have done last week, then we had some text over there, and I think you were the last person. Is that correct, Ben?
I did a little bit of expansion on some of the points and incorporating some of the comments that Jasmina had made. But I'd spoken to Lorenzo, and he said him and Chris would be quite happy to add some expertise. You know, what Chris was just saying would be really interesting to incorporate here, and some of the challenges you've faced. So perhaps you guys could work on that in the next few days. I don't know, either Lorenzo and Chris just read through and add your suggestions, or if you want to chat with them.
Okay, and there was this point of having an example, maybe, right?
Yeah, so certainly if there's examples that you can call upon from your experience in this pandemic, but as long as it's kind of looking forward to future pandemics, not just what the challenges you've had this time, but you know, if there's obviously things we can improve on or things that we need to implement before the next hypothetical.
So thoughts I put there at the moment are about all this discussion about the data, the fact that you might have multiple discordant data streams, and because they are all biased. And I've just added now, after Ian, you just mentioned a couple of things. I put the fact that all the data is delayed and in different ways. And I think I added that, or I at least put it as a comment in the interventions section, because then you need to kind of take into account that interventions need to, you need to leave enough time, for example, between different interventions in order to understand what the intervention has done, because it takes a while for the data to feed through. So I put it there, but clearly it kind of fits here as well. We can work in that direction. And I don't know whether people want, we were talking now about the example. Do you want something about like estimation of R, for example? Is that in any way an example that people want us to talk about? Because that's that's a challenge, that a practical request that we try to work on that makes these challenges become apparent. For example, that you can never estimate R now. You can only estimate R 2 weeks ago because of the delays in the data streams. That you need a combination of different models, so that comes in as well. Depending on what models depending on what data streams you're fitting, you get slightly different estimates of R, because every data stream is a bit biased. So that is a particularly technical example. And the last thing I would like to say is that Chris knows this quite well now, but basically you have, in order to, R is an average, so you need a certain data point over which to average, and you might need to decide whether you want a more accurate estimate that is informed by multiple data points. So for example, you take the last 3 weeks of data point and you try to estimate, for example, the growth rate, okay, how the epidemic is progressing in that particular those 3 weeks, and you get one number. If you restrict that to 2 weeks, then you get a much more variable, you get a much larger confidence interval, and your median estimate might be extremely kind of poorly constrained by the data because you have very little data points. And that seems to be like a choice that we have to do week by week in order to understand how much we trust and how much data points we want to use in the last window. And it seems like I was particularly shocked by how much personal judgment goes into a process that should be kind of mathematical, mechanical, and precise. And instead I'm like, oh, now there is a change in policy. Should I kind of allow the last 3 weeks of data, or should I just accept the last week of data because a week ago there was a change in policy? And that kind of stuff is just it's just a continuous challenge in the estimation of, in particular, of the reproduction number in this case. But so
yeah, so examples would be useful. I mean, there is in Philip's section he talked about R0, and there are mentions elsewhere, but if you can tie it back specifically to the challenges in the data, then yeah, absolutely, then those sorts of things are very helpful.
Thank you.
Okay.
So yeah, if you guys could work on that this week, and Francesca, if you feel that you could contribute to that section as well, then that's great. Otherwise, working on the interventions as well. That's another option.
I'll follow Lorenzo. I'll have a look.
Have you guys got access to the Dropbox? You need.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. So I think that's all the sections covered. 7.4, I think Glenn's done a bit of editing this week, but I don't think it's changed drastically from last time. And I'll do some work on moving some of the more introductory sections over to the introduction. And hopefully by this time next week, we can have a single working document that we can start doing some serious editing on, because I think 7.2 is done, or very good. And 7.5 and 7.4 are quite far on the way now as well. So with Lorenzo's input, then get 7.3 up to the same level. That'd be great.
Can I just ask a quick question? Because I'm
of course, yeah.
In 7.3, if I look at that, I'm only getting track changes from Jasmina and not from anybody else. I would like to be able to see other things. I mean, as far as I can see, I've got I should be able to see everything, but the only comments I see and the only changes I see are some comments of Jasmina's, which have been there for a while, and I'm not seeing anything from Lorenzo or you, although you've got your initials. It sort of implies that something's been going on. So I'm just a bit puzzled as to why I can't see them.
I downloaded this and then re-uploaded it, so maybe in that process some of the comments for the track changes might have.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to make sure I'm looking at the latest.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the latest version that I uploaded.
Yeah, okay.
A couple of hours ago.
At the very last edits that I've just mentioned now, they are in the one that ends with LP. I don't know whether anything has been saved afterwards.
Yeah, so there's a version that ends BS that I think was after that. If you could copy them across to that version.
That's what I can't see. I can't see anything from LP or BS in that.
At the bottom in LP, that should.
Not obviously.
Okay.
So I just wonder if. Well, I don't know. I don't know whether it's me or it's somewhere else.
I can't see anything.
Okay.
I mean, maybe they haven't been uploaded or something. Well, it's funny because I mean the file names have got the extra initials on, but the actual files don't seem to have any changes.
I've now copied into the one that ends in BS at the bottom, if it's helpful.
Let's just check. I mean, that's helpful. That's the latest version. So
yeah, I think mine is a bit. That one is not yet updated, so maybe it's still on its way.
Yeah, I can see those now, Lorenzo. Thank you.
Okay.
So yeah, if you guys could make your edits or changes or suggestions to that version, that would be great.
Fantastic.
And then when are you likely to have that done by, say, Tuesday next week? Would that be a realistic
Yes.
time frame? And then I can spend a bit of time on Wednesday putting everything together ready for the next meeting.
Okay.
And anyone else who wants to make suggestions or comments on other sections, then please feel free to do so.
Okay.
Before then.
I'm going to give my apologies for next week, but I'm away next week moving house, so won't be at the meeting next week, and I won't be able to look at it, but I will try to look at the draft for the following week.
Great, thanks TJ, and good luck with the house move.
Thank you.
Nothing like stressful times to move house.
Yeah, right in the middle of lockdown, it's not great.
Yeah.
And you know, at least it's moving after a year and a half.
True. Okay, in that case, I think we can end there unless anyone has any final comments. But thanks everyone for your suggestions, and see you all next week, if not before.
Okay.
Thanks very much,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye for now.
Bye.
Cheers.